Dr. Sherry Schultz is Director of Operations for the section of Cooperative Water Supply Operations on the Potomac at ICPRB. ICPRB's co-op section provides support to the Washington metropolitan area's regional water supply system. Dr. Schultz is responsible for water demand and availability forecast for the region, conducted every 5 years, which included estimates of the impact of upstream consumptive use of Potomac River flows and the potential impact of climate change, and is also responsible for management of metropolitan area water supplies and operations during periods of drought. Dr. Schultz holds a bachelor's degree in physics from Stanford University, a doctoral degree in physics from the State University of New York at Stony Brook, and a master's degree in civil engineering from the University of Maryland. Go Terps. Gordon Mike Selkman is the Associate Director of Aquatic Habitats at ICPRB. He is responsible for evaluating and assessing the habitat quality and biological health communities within Potomac waters. His work coordinates the cooperation of federal, state, academic, and local partners to find and implement solutions to environmental issues. Prior to joining ICPRB, Mr. Selkman worked for the University of Maryland Chesapeake Biological Laboratory, Round River Conservation, in the Okavango Research Institute. He is currently the primary investigator and project coordinator for the ICPRB's Large River Assessment HAB program, North Branch Potomac Tailwater Optimization, and Groundwater Biological Studies. Mr. Selkman holds MS in environmental biology from Hood College, a BA in biology from St. Mary's College of Maryland. With that, Dr. Schultz.
Thank you very much, Akli. Next slide, please. So I was asked to talk about ICPRB's co-op section, and our focus is primarily on water quantity, almost solely on water quantity, except for the fact that co-op staff do moonlight on the contaminant spill team. I'm going to talk about, whether there will be source water, and not so much about what the quality will be. So I'm going to give an overview on co-op. Why was it created? What does it do now? What's its role in the basin? And how we are helping, some of the things we're doing to help enhance water supply resilience. Again, from a quantity point of view. So this is a two-part presentation because I'm then going to talk a little bit about co-op's largest resource, Jennings-Randolph Reservoir, way up in the North Branch Potomac Basin. And really dramatic water quality improvements have occurred there. That's giving us some big opportunities for the North Branch region. So many issues up in the North Branch region and so many stakeholders. So there, COP is involved to some degree, and ICPRB is involved on developing a new framework for collaboration. So the best person to talk about the North Branch is ICPRB's Mike Selkman, who spends a lot of time up there monitoring, talking to people, and he has a great handle on this. Next slide, please. So how did co-op come about? In the 1960s and before, it was the Army Corps of Engineers that was responsible for doing water supply studies for our region. They came out with a study in 1963 that said, we may soon run out of water. And in fact, in 1966, a drought occurred and the Potomac hit its lowest flow on record. So people were very nervous that it was only a matter of years before the region would run out of water. People started working on this technically at ICPRB, Johns Hopkins, University of Maryland, doing technical work, what to do. And there was focus on how to use the systems approach to increase the reliability of the region's resources. And this systems approach showed that if the suppliers worked together, coordinated their operations, there would be more water, more reliability than if everyone went off on their own. A number of regional agreements were signed. One of the most important is the Low Flow Allocation Agreement in 1978. We're still talking about that agreement. I'll mention that again. This was prompted by the federal government. Congress was nervous, and it provided a formula for emergency allocation of water should the region run out. And again, people thought it was only a matter of time before we ran out of water. ICPRB established a special section, the co-op section. It consisted of all but one of the jurisdictions, Maryland, Virginia, the District of Columbia, and West Virginia. I've forgotten West Virginia on this list, and the federal government. Prior to the co-op section, ICPRB focused on pollution issues. That was its mandate. But the co-op section was allowed to focus on water resource and supply and availability issues. And finally, the agreement that really created the collaborative system in 1982, the Water Supply Coordination Agreement, along with some reservoir cost share agreements. This was signed by the main water suppliers, Fairfax Water, WSSC, Washington Aqueduct, the District of Columbia, and ICPRB. So this established the regional cooperative system that I'm going to talk about. Next slide, please. So just a brief snapshot of what the system is. It's kind of unique. It's an interstate regional system. Not many of those exist in the country. Fairfax Water, Washington Aqueduct, a division of the Army Corps of Engineers and the supplier of Washington, D.C., and WSSC Water are the suppliers that constitute the system, and they're actually the governing, they govern what our section staff does. The reservoir cost share agreements that were signed at the same time the Water Supply Coordination Agreement was signed in '82 provided cost share for Jennings-Randolph Reservoir, Little Seneca Reservoir, and Savage Reservoir. And those are the shared reservoir resources that we have. And finally, the Water Supply Coordination Agreement, it did a lot of things, but it requires coordination of operations of these three suppliers' operations during drought. And the technical administrative support for the system is provided by ICPRB's co-op section. So that's how we are involved in what the suppliers do. Here you see two of our most important reservoirs, Little Seneca and Jennings-Randolph. Next slide, please. A map of our system resources. And so here's why we worry about resilience. 78% of our metro region water comes from the Potomac River. We're very heavily dependent on a sole source of water, the Potomac River. And you can see on the map, there's a oblong circle where the metro area suppliers have their Potomac River intakes just above Washington, D.C., and just above Little Falls Dam. That's really our operational target where there's an environmental flow by. The rest of the water on average comes from two off-Potomac reservoirs owned by respectively Fairfax Water and WSSC Water. Those are the Occoquan Reservoir and the Patuxent reservoirs. And the upstream reservoirs I just mentioned, where there are cost share agreements, are used to release water during low flow drought periods. So those are Jennings-Randolph, up again in the Potomac North Branch, and Savage Reservoir, that is operated by the Corps in conjunction with Jennings. And then a much closer reservoir, Little Seneca, is near to ICPRB's office in Montgomery County, Maryland. Next slide, please. So very briefly, what do we do in the co-op section? under the Water Supply Coordination Agreement, one thing we do is drought planning, or will there be enough water? And we're required to do that every 5 years, according to the agreements. And, or the water suppliers are required to do this. And we've been doing this on their behalf ever since the requirement was put in place since 1990. And sometimes we also conduct special studies. For example, in 2017, after a number of our planning studies started indicating that there could be a problem during an extreme future drought, we evaluated a whole slew of water supply alternatives to compare and contrast how they can contribute to reliability. And when we do these forecasts, we forecast both water demands and availability. And of course, climate change now figures into our availability forecasts to a large degree. And we focus on whether climate change will increase drought severity during extreme droughts in our region. So we're focusing not on all the slew of problems that climate change might bring to our area, but just how it will affect stream flows. And in particular, how it will affect stream flows in a 100-year drought year, that is, in a very extreme drought year. Because it's only extreme droughts that really drive the results of our planning studies. So we do our planning studies using a daily reservoir simulation model driven by Potomac River flows and reservoir inflows. The other thing we need to understand is upstream consumptive use. There are water users upstream of the Washington metropolitan area, so we need to understand how their use is increasing or not, and how that's going to affect water flow in the Potomac River in the future. Here on this slide to the left, you see a data center park planned for Frederick County, Maryland, called the Quantum Loophole Data Center Community. It's a 2,100 acre parcel of land that's being developed into many data center, I think 20 data center campuses. And we weren't even thinking about data centers last year when we initiated our 2025 water supply planning study. And now we are. We have to try to understand to what degree water use by data centers upstream of the district is going to affect river flows in the future. And I should say, for us, the future right now is 2050. That's our forecast year. Next slide, please. Another of our roles is drought response. We have to make sure there's enough water this summer. And some of you might be aware that we started our drought response light phase drought monitoring on July 7th. And we do that when the Potomac River flow at Point of Rocks, Maryland falls below 2,000 cubic feet per second. Thankfully, it looks like we're going to be out of drought monitoring by the end of this week. But when in our drought monitoring stage, we compile river flow and withdrawal data. Actually, we now have in place systems that automatically do that 365 days of the year, so we can keep testing our models. But we look at the flow and withdrawal data during drought monitoring, and we email stakeholders every morning, letting them know what's happening, letting them know about any unusual conditions, and that's what we've been doing. A more serious drought stage is drought operations, and we haven't gone into drought operations yet this summer. Drought operations has a lower trigger, and basically during drought operations, every day we review, do we need to make a reservoir release from Jennings-Randolph, from Little Seneca? So we compile flow, withdrawal data, and reservoir storage data. We report twice daily to our stakeholders. And we also, if we're really making reservoir releases, coordinate their operations, their use of Potomac intakes versus their off Potomac intakes to try to save reservoir storage when the river's up, try to use reservoir storage when the river's down. We're very dependent in drought operations on daily river flow forecasts. The Potomac is a highly variable river, even during droughts. It's going up and down, and we're trying to forecast needs tomorrow and needs in 9 days, because that's the amount of time it takes for Little Seneca release to arrive to the intakes, or a Jennings-Randolph release to arrive to the intakes. Next slide, please. Finally, we also facilitate regional cooperation. Let's work together. And what we've been doing most recently is coordinating what we call the Supplemental Storage Work Group. It looks like the region needs more storage. We conduct drought exercises every year, except for years when we conduct drought operations. Recently, we've been supporting reviews and updates of regional agreements. This is something that our ICPRB commissioners have felt is important. This is one of their priorities. So certain co-op staff are working hard on this, and a related effort trying to put together a collaborative process to potentially review the Little Falls environmental flow by. I won't really have time to talk about that, but a lot of people here are involved in that. Next slide, please. So as far as enhancing water supply resilience, here's the two of the main things we're doing. First of all, we've joined in the effort to look for a new water source for the Washington metropolitan area. As I said, the area has a heavy reliance on a single source, the Potomac River. Mike Nardolilli did a review of major metropolitan areas, and we're really the most vulnerable in that regard in the country. It makes us vulnerable to spills in the Potomac River and to extreme drought. Another thing we're doing has to do, so the most recent things that have happened are a feasibility study was authorized by the Water Resources Development Act of 2022. The second thing we're involved in is updating, trying to support the Corps in updating the use of Jennings-Randolph Reservoir. And this is something Mike's going to talk about in a second. And this is in response to some language in the Water Resources Development Act of 2007. This language called for the Corps entering into an agreement with ICPRB to revise drought operations during drought emergencies. So far what we've done, so how to do this? The Corps has their way of doing things, and so we need to work closely with them. We conducted a study called the Phase 2 Scoping Study. It's available on our website to really scope out how to make this happen. Next slide, please. As far as a new source, what have we done? We started thinking about this, the co-op water suppliers started thinking about this in 2012, 2013, 2014, and we contracted with Black & Veatch to study potential use of a local quarry for regional raw water storage. And these studies came out in 2014 and 2015. That quarry is named Travilla Quarry. It's in Montgomery County, Maryland. We formed, as I mentioned, the Supplemental Storage Work Group in 2018 to start trying to make things happen. This is a coalition of stakeholders, including the water suppliers, the states, the Metropolitan Council of Governments, local jurisdictions. Now CISA is involved. We have a lot of people helping out. And the first great outcome was WRDA 2022, language in WRDA 2022. This was actually proposed by Congresswoman Norton, who we've been working closely with. Mike Nardolilli has been communicating with for the last several years. So the Corps, Congress passed this language authorizing a feasibility study on a secondary water source. And the Corps has initiated this study just this year. They are going to consider all options, not just Travilla Quarry, and they're going to come up with the best solution considering many options. Next slide. Lastly, updating use of Jennings-Randolph Reservoir. Just want to talk about how co-op is involved with this, and then Mike's going to talk about Jennings-Randolph Reservoir. But this is our largest resource, our largest reservoir. It was completed in 1983 with the non-federal cost share provided by the co-op suppliers. So it's a federal facility, and these cannot be built unless there is a non-federal cost share. Releases from this reservoir take 9 days to reach the metropolitan area during drought. That's pretty slow. So though it is our largest reservoir, I wouldn't say it's our most important reservoir. It shares that with Little Seneca. Little Seneca is smaller, but nearby, and so we can get water more efficiently to the metropolitan area. But WRDA 2007 called for revisions of operations, use of water quality storage for water supply during drought emergencies. So there's 2 types of storage in the reservoir, and we are still working with the Corps on how to make this happen. And one thing the joint scoping study recommended is a drought contingency plan. So last slide, please, Mike. Just a little, last thing I want to say about Jennings-Randolph Reservoir. Again, it has two types of storage. Of course, there's really only one reservoir, but about 45% of the water in the reservoir when it's full at conservation pool level is, quote, owned by the co-op water suppliers and only released when we phone the Corps and say, please, we need water supply help, please make a release. This has only happened in 3 different years, 1999 and 2002. Those were moderate drought years, and also a small event in autumn of 2010. So that water basically just sits there, ready to be used if we need it. Secondly, about 55% of the reservoir is used by the Corps. It's called water quality storage. It's used every day for a multitude of purposes: downstream water quality, aquatic habitat, recreation,